Our group will present research on the Sue story. The research we have chosen is Edward Albee, The Sue Story as the Play of Absurd and the Theme of Existentialism. Albee's early work demonstrates his mastery of the theater of the absurd, a movement that reached its zenith with European playwrights like Jean Genet, Samuel Beckett, and Eugene Ionesco, as well as Harold Pinter. The play delves into the theme of isolation, solitude, and dehumanization in a commercialized society. Initially titled Peter and Jerry, it faced rejection from New York producers. Eventually published in 1958 as a Sue story, it emerged as Albee inaugural and noteworthy absurdist work, shedding light on social disparity and dehumanization in today's business-driven world. Albee himself considered a process of writing the play transformative, realizing that he had been playwright all along. Despite not having written play before, the Sue story marked a turning point, allowing him to fully embrace his creative instinct. He completed the play in just 3 weeks, feeling that everything in his life had led up into that moment. With the writing flowing from the deep inner conviction, this marked the onset of Albee's prolific and distinguished career as a playwright. Notability: in 2004, Albee expanded the Sue story into a two-act play. Theater of the Absurd. The theater of the absurd is a genre of play coined by critic Martin Esslin in the late 1950s. It delves into existential despair, portraying a world of broken communication and irrationality. This work, like Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot, features characters grappling with a life's seeming meaninglessness. They blend comedy with tragedy, often showing futile, repetitive actions. Dialogue is marked by cliché, wordplay, and nonsense. Plots are cyclical or expansively absurd, rejecting realism influences by their turbulent era. Absurdist play confront life's inherent absurdity, suggesting actions are ultimately futile. Example theater of the absurd. Edward Albee. The Sue story is an interesting example of the theater of the absurd. In no one scene, Jerry plays a role in the story. There is a talk about experiences with a dog in park. This continuation is a path toward the meaning of life and human struggle in a seemingly meaningless world. This narrative transforms the ordinary nature of this event into unprincipled phenomenon. It makes human life meaningless. Communication becomes both confusing and ultimately silence. The Sue story as an absurd play. The Sue story by Edward Albee is an absurd play that challenges conventional drama. It explores that existentialist idea that life is inherently meaningless and often unhappy. The play lacks a traditional plot, emphasizing the futility of human endeavor and the fascination with death. The meeting between characters Jerry and Peter highlight the disconnect and cruelty prevalent in human interaction. This work introduces recurring theme in Albee plays, particularly the lack of the genuine contact between people. The play subverts traditional expectation of well-defined characters, realistic dialogue, and a neatly structured plot, ultimately leading to Jerry's death. Example of a scene from the Sue story that exemplifies its absurd and existential nature. In setting: a bench in a central park, Jerry and Peter are sitting. Jerry is animated. Peter is reserved. Jerry: you know, I've been coming to this park for years, watching people like you lost in their little world. Peter: okay. Jerry: it's also absurd, isn't it? We go on with our life pretending there is some grand meaning to it all. Peter: well, I believe there is some proposed reconnection we made. Jerry. Connections? They're just fleeting moments in a vast, indifferent universe. We are all alone in the end. Peter. But don't you find joy in small things? Like beautiful sunsets? Jerry. Ah, yes. The sunsets. A cosmic joke painting the sky before plunging us into darkness. It's also tragedy, hilarious. This scene captured the essence of the Zoo story as an absurd play, with Jerry's existentialist viewpoint contrasting sharply with Peter's more conventional belief. It highlighted the absurdity and meaninglessness of human existence, creating a thought-provoking and intense exchange between the characters. Absurdist quality in the Zoo story. Essential trait: an absurd play rejects realism, opting for unconventional character and situations. Time, place, and identity blur define casualty. It's employ nonsense for dreamlike atmosphere, contrasting a serene setting with a live chaos. Despite disorder, hidden meaning often emerge, even in seemingly random titles. Characters. In absurdist drama, characters lack distinct personality and often remain nameless. They feel isolated and rejected by society. They abandon rational thought as it proved insufficient in their incomprehensible universe. Many are like automatons, stuck in their repetitive routines and speaking in cliché. Characters are often stereotypical or flat, resembling commedia, the art archetype. For example, in the play, Peter and Jerry remain unchanged throughout, with no character development. The dramatist focus on exploring Jerry's inner conflict and motivation for self-immolation, emphasizing the absurdity of existence.
In the language of the Zoo story often appear nonsensical, yet some dialogue remain naturalistic. Moments of nonsense or cliches create misunderstanding, dividing the absurd. The language can be phonetic and lyric, adding a playful quality. It combines absurd and natural elements, reflecting the struggle of verbal communication. For example, about language in the Zoo story, there are a wide variety and depth of language. For example, in the conversation between Jerry and Peter. Jerry, do you live in the one of these apartment hall on 75th Street, don't you? Peter, yes, I do. Jerry, in the one of new building? Peter, yes, in the one of the new building. This conversation we will see a natural conversation between Jerry and Peter about Peter's general well-being, and it showcases their every language without of any of nonsense. Moreover, language is used to create fun and intelligent conversation. Part of the Zoo story is an absurdist play that deviates from the traditional plot structure. It revolves around two characters, Peter and Jerry. Jerry, a complex and unpredictable character, keeps empty picture film, symbolizing his lack of meaningful connection. Peter, in contrast, is portrayed as dull and conventional. The play center theme lies in absurdity and emptiness of human existence. The story of the Zoo Level Toll reflects the world inherent lack of coherence. The frustration with the inexplicable leads into the sense of despair of the both characters. The play delves into the model human condition, highlighting the futility and absurdity of life. It addresses existential question and portray the breakdown of value of monotony of routine. The Zoo story is considered the seminal work in 20th century American drama, sparking debate over the artistic merits upon its release. Ultimately, it had a sequel. It's paid as a masterpiece that significantly impacted the literary landscape. The theme of existentialism in the Zoo story revolves around the profound sense of isolation and disconnection experienced by the character Jerry and Peter. Jerry, a lonely and troubled man, seeks genuine human connection and understanding. He confronts Peter, a representative of a conformist and isolated middle-class existence, in the attempt to bridge the gap between the world. The play highlights challenges of the communication in the society where individuals are trapped by socio-economic and interpersonal barriers. Ultimately, Jerry tragic and emphasize the difficulty of breaking free from the confines of isolation and the need for genuine human connection. The play grapple with the existential question of the individual existence, isolation, and the research for the meaning in a seeming indifferent world. For example, about the theme of existentialism, the scene where the dog is poisoned and Jelly ultimately stabs himself in the Zoo story is profoundly tragic and powerful moment that embody in the theme of existentialism. As Jelly recalls the story of dog death, he revealed the callous defiance of the landlady who poisoned the dog without remorse. This serve as a stark example of the cool and indifferent nature of the world, reflecting the existential idea that life can be unjust and devoid in its inherent meaning. Jerry's decision to take his own life as a culmination of his existential struggle. He felt trapped and isolated, unable to find a journalist's connection and understanding in the world around him. He act of self-destruction as a desperate attempt to assert control over his own existence, to escape the confines of life that feel devoid of meaning. For the tragic scene highlight the existential concept of individual agency and responsibility for one's own existence. Jelly's final act is a declaration of his autonomy, a refusal to accept the life that feels devoid, the true connection or purpose, as is a heartbreaking treatment to the profound loneliness and despite his experience. Ultimately, the scene underscores the central existential theme of the Zoo story, the research for meaning, connection, and authenticity in the world that often feels different and isolating. Jelly tragic and serve as a powerful reminder of the challenges individuals face in navigating on their own existence in the seemingly indifferent universe. The Zoo story have always been considered representative of the theater of the absurd. In the Zoo story, Ashworth Abbey explored the key term, existentialism and the absurd. The playwright point into the idea that human life is fundamentally ridiculous and horrifying. Therefore, the communicating to the language is equally nonsensical. Mostly to the protagonist Jelly, the permanent, temporary, the Paris explore the key term of existentialism, Dadaism, surrealism, and the absurd. Existentialism treats individual as a conscious being who live life of angst, resistance, rebellion, vanity, and alienation. In the midst of emptiness or the zero that surrounds, the death is not as important as breath. In this case, it can be safely said that Jelly comes off as a perfect symbol of a rare person who are serenity and serenity caused him to suffer miserably.